Lately, it seems like the word conservative, well, it's been getting used in so many ways.
Yeah, it's definitely not as straightforward as it used to be.
Right. And that's what really drew me to this analysis we're looking at today. It's called Trump or Reagan.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It really dives into how conservative politics is evolving. You've got the traditional ideas, but then there's this populist wave that we've seen gain so much traction.
Exactly. And what makes this analysis so interesting is that it doesn't just look at the ideas themselves. It actually brings Gen Z conservatives into the conversation. Like, how are they making sense of all this?
It's really fascinating. So let's break it down. What exactly are we hoping to learn from this analysis today?
Well, first off, I think it's important to say we're not trying to take sides or say one approach is better than the other.
Right, we're just here to understand.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We want to understand these different branches of conservatism, what they really stand for, and maybe even get a glimpse of where they might be headed.
Sounds good.
And to do that, the analysis pulls in a ton of different perspectives and commentary. It's not just one person's opinion, it's a whole conversation.
Okay, so the analysis starts off with this really thought-provoking question. With figures like Trump and Reagan representing such different styles, what should be the core values that guide younger conservatives?
Right, because those two figures really highlight the tension between traditional conservatism and the newer populist conservatism.
So maybe we should start with traditional conservatism. What does the analysis say about its roots?
So traditional conservatism, it's deeply tied to what we often call classical liberalism.
Okay, following.
It puts a huge emphasis on individual rights.
Like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And then you've got things like civil liberties and, of course, the power of free markets.
Limited government, right. That seems to have been a unifying factor for a long time.
It really was. It brought together all sorts of groups under the conservative umbrella. Economic conservatives, social conservatives, even those who identify as civil libertarians.
All united by the idea that government should play a smaller role in people's lives.
Precisely.
Okay, so then you have populist conservatism. It feels like that's a different beast altogether.
Yeah, and the analysis really drives that point home when it talks about Donald Trump's victory in 2016. It frames it as a counterpunch.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was a reaction, a statement from people who felt ignored or even left behind by the establishment. It really challenged that traditional conservative emphasis on free markets being the solution to everything.
Right, like their concerns weren't being addressed by the traditional approach.
Exactly.
And the analysis also brings up this idea of post-liberalism. I'll admit that's a new term for me. Can you explain what it means?
Sure. Post-liberalism is this idea that's gaining ground. It suggests that the state and the government actually has a role to play in promoting conservative values and causes.
So it's not just about limiting government, it's about using government to achieve certain goals.
Right. And the analysis points out that this idea is gaining traction, especially among conservatives who are worried that individual liberty alone might not be enough to protect the values they hold dear.
Interesting. So where do Gen Z conservatives fit into all of this? It seems like they're caught in the middle of these different currents.
You hit the nail on the head. They're navigating a complex landscape. And what's fascinating is that the analysis highlights how some young conservatives are taking a more, quote, aggressively progressive stance on certain cultural issues.
Really? That's not what a lot of people might expect when they think of young conservatives.
Right. It's a reminder that this generation is forging its own path. They're building their own political infrastructure and challenging some of the traditional assumptions about conservatism.
Wow, so it seems like we're seeing some serious internal debate within the conservative movement.
Absolutely. And the analysis points to a divergence, even a bit of a battle brewing between different groups.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, on the one hand, you have those who are still deeply committed to the idea of limited government. They're voicing their concerns in platforms like National Review and the Dispatch, pushing back against what they see as the dangers of government overreach.
Right, they're sticking to those traditional principles.
But on the other side, you have those who are more drawn to the post-liberal perspective. And those committed to limited government, well, they're worried that the post-liberal approach could lead to abandoning that core principle altogether.
It sounds like a real clash of perspectives. So if we were to sum up the main takeaways from the analysis, where do you think we land?
Well, it's clear that the conservative movement is not a monolith. There are deep ideological tensions at play, and they're coming to a head, especially as a new generation of conservatives is emerging and seeking to define its own values.
That brings us back to those fundamental questions the analysis poses. The size and role of government, individual liberty versus collective aims, and ultimately the most effective means to achieve conservative goals.
Yeah, those are the big ones. They're at the heart of this whole conversation.
So for those of you listening, we want you to take a moment and really consider this. What are the most enduring principles that should guide a political movement? And how do we strike a balance between individual liberty and achieving broader societal aims? What do you think?
It's a question worth pondering.
It really is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time.
See you then.